4:47 a.m. Minneapolis. The temperature has dropped to 18 degrees below zero, and the wind coming off the Mississippi River makes it feel even colder. Snow that fell 3 days ago remains frozen in place, untouched and undisturbed on sidewalks where no footprints have appeared. Streetlights cast pale circles on empty intersections, while the windows of residential buildings stay dark. At this hour, Minneapolis belongs to no one. The city exists in suspended animation, waiting for morning to arrive. On a side street in the Cedar Riverside neighborhood, a convoy of 4 vehicles approaches without headlights. The engines run quiet, modified to reduce sound signatures that might attract attention from early risers or security cameras with audio detection. The vehicles slow to a stop along the curb, spacing themselves at intervals that suggest coordination rather than coincidence. For 30 seconds, nothing moves. The occupants remain inside, watching the building ahead through frosted windows while their breath fogs the glass. Then, one by one, the doors open. The people who step out do not look like federal agents preparing for a raid. They wear civilian clothes, heavy winter coats, knit caps pulled low against the cold. No tactical gear is visible. No weapons are drawn. No voices break the silence. They move toward the building with the measured pace of people who have rehearsed this approach dozens of times, knowing exactly where to position themselves and exactly when to advance. The building ahead appears unremarkable, a 2-story structure with a faded sign identifying it as a licensed childcare facility. According to state records, this location has operated continuously for 7 years, serving an average of 240 children per day. Monthly subsidy payments from federal and state programs have flowed steadily into accounts associated with this address, totaling millions of dollars over the life of the operation. The paperwork is impeccable. The licensing inspections have all been passed. Every form required by the Minnesota Department of Human Services has been filed on time and approved without exception. But none of that explains why the parking lot is empty at an hour when staff should be arriving to prepare for the morning. None of it explains why no lights are visible inside. And none of it explains why federal investigators have spent 8 months building a case around this specific address. The lead agent reaches the front entrance and pauses. A key obtained through proper administrative channels slides into the lock. The door opens without resistance. Cold air rushes outward from the interior, carrying with it a smell that does not belong to a functioning childcare center. It is the smell of disuse, of rooms that have not been opened or heated or occupied for a very long time. In that moment, before anyone steps across the threshold, the truth becomes undeniable. Whatever happens inside this building has nothing to do with children. The investigation that led to this doorway began not with surveillance or informants, but with numbers that did not make sense. 18 months earlier, analysts at the Department of Health and Human Services noticed anomalies in subsidy payment data flowing through Minnesota's child care assistance programs. The state operates one of the most generous child care subsidy systems in the country, designed to help low-income families afford quality care for their children while parents work or attend school. Billions of dollars move through these programs annually, distributed across thousands of licensed providers, serving hundreds of thousands of children. The scale of the system makes comprehensive oversight nearly impossible. Auditors rely on sampling, spot checks, and automated flags to identify potential problems. Most fraud that occurs within welfare systems is small-scale and opportunistic. Individual providers inflating attendance numbers by a few children or billing for hours that were never actually provided. The amounts involved are typically measured in thousands of dollars, sometimes tens of thousands. What the analysts found in Minnesota was different. They began by pulling payment histories for a cluster of daycare facilities operating in the Twin Cities metropolitan area. The facilities appeared unrelated on the surface, registered under different corporate names with different listed owners and different physical addresses. But when the financial data was laid side by side, patterns emerged that could not be explained by coincidence. Subsidy payments to these facilities had grown at nearly identical rates over a 5-year period. The monthly totals showed almost no variation, rising steadily without the natural fluctuations that characterize real childcare operations. Legitimate providers experience seasonal changes in enrollment. They see dips during summer months when families travel. They record absences during flu season and holidays. Their numbers move up and down in response to the unpredictable realities of caring for young children. These facilities showed none of that. Their numbers climbed in straight lines, month after month, year after year, as if enrollment were a mathematical formula rather than a reflection of actual children attending actual programs. The analysts flagged the cluster for deeper review. Licensing records were pulled and compared. The names of directors and managers were extracted and cross-referenced. Within days, a troubling picture began to form. The same individuals appeared repeatedly across multiple facilities, listed as directors at locations that operated during the same hours. According to the paperwork, these people were simultaneously managing childcare programs at sites separated by 20 or 30 miles, an impossibility for anyone bound by the normal constraints of time and transportation. The documentation was too clean. The numbers were too consistent. The corporate structures were too deliberately fragmented. Everything about this cluster suggested intentional design rather than organic growth. Someone had built a system specifically engineered to pass routine compliance checks while extracting maximum value from public funding streams. That realization triggered the formal investigation. FBI and ICE teams were brought in to supplement the analytical work being done at the agency level. The case was assigned a priority classification that reflected the potential scale of the fraud. Investigators began building profiles of the individuals connected to the flagged facilities, tracing their financial histories, immigration records, real estate holdings, and business registrations across multiple states. What they found was a network far more extensive than the original cluster suggested. The connected individuals were not operating a few fraudulent daycares. They were operating dozens, spread across Minnesota, Ohio, Wisconsin, and Arizona. The corporate structures were layered and complex, with shell companies holding ownership stakes in other shell companies that in turn held the licenses for individual facilities. Money flowed through these structures in patterns designed to obscure its ultimate destination, splitting into smaller amounts, passing through intermediary accounts, and eventually disappearing into channels that led beyond American borders. By the time investigators were ready to move, they had mapped a network involving more than 40 childcare facilities claiming to serve thousands of children. The total subsidy payments flowing to these facilities exceeded $250 million over the previous 5 years. The question was no longer whether fraud was occurring. The question was how deep the fraud went and what it was ultimately funding. The decision was made to conduct coordinated inspections at multiple locations simultaneously, appearing as routine administrative visits while actually serving as the opening phase of a federal enforcement operation. The Minneapolis location was selected as the primary target because the data suggested it served as a hub for the broader network, the place where financial flows converged and administrative functions were coordinated. The first room the team enters appears normal at first glance. Shelves line the walls, stocked with toys arranged by category. Blocks in one section, stuffed animals in another. Picture books standing upright with their spines visible. The organization suggests care and attention, the kind of deliberate arrangement that licensing inspectors expect to see during facility reviews. But something is wrong. The toys are too perfect. There is no visible wear on the blocks, no fraying on the stuffed animals, no creases on the book spines. These are not toys that have been handled by small children day after day. They are toys that have been placed on shelves and left untouched. An investigator reaches toward a shelf and draws a finger across the surface. A clean line appears through a thin layer of dust, confirming what the visual inspection already suggested. This room has not been used in weeks, possibly months. The team moves deeper into the building and the pattern repeats. Cribs stand in a sleeping room, mattresses covered with sheets pulled tight enough to bounce a coin. No indentations, no wrinkles, no signs that any child has ever rested there. A kitchen area contains industrial appliances that appear brand new, their surfaces unmarked by the scratches and stains that accumulate in facilities where food is actually prepared and served. A bathroom designed for young children features miniature toilets and sinks at appropriate heights, but the fixtures show no water stains, no soap residue, no evidence of daily use. Every room tells the same story. The facility was built and equipped to look like a functioning daycare. It was maintained at a level sufficient to pass visual inspection, but no children have ever attended programs here. The enrollment records filed with the state, the attendance sheets submitted to justify subsidy payments, the detailed documentation of services provided, all of it was fabricated. In a small office at the back of the building, the investigation shifts from confirmation of fraud to discovery of something far more serious. Filing cabinets line one wall filled with binders containing what appear to be complete records for hundreds of children. Names, dates of birth, social security numbers, family contact information, all the documentation required to enroll a child in a state-subsidized childcare program. The paperwork is meticulous. Forms are filled out completely. Signatures appear in all the required places. If these records were submitted during a routine audit, they would pass without question. But the children described in these records do not exist. They are fabrications, ghost identities created for the sole purpose of unlocking public funds. Each fake child represents a stream of subsidy payments flowing from government programs into accounts controlled by the network. Multiplied across dozens of facilities and thousands of invented identities, the scale of the theft becomes staggering. Then investigators find the safe. It sits in a corner of the office, a commercial-grade unit bolted to the floor and concealed behind a stack of supply boxes. The combination is obtained through methods that will later be detailed in court filings. When the door swings open, the contents change everything about how this case will be classified. Cash fills the interior, bound in thick stacks wrapped with black plastic and arranged in neat rows. The amounts will later be counted and documented, but the immediate impression is one of scale far exceeding what a welfare fraud operation would typically accumulate. More significant than the cash itself are the markings visible on some of the wrapped bundles. Symbols that federal investigators immediately recognize. Identifiers associated with transnational criminal organizations. Cartel signatures. The presence of those markings transforms the investigation instantaneously. What began as a case of welfare fraud has become something far more dangerous. The Daycare network was not simply stealing public money. It was functioning as a money laundering operation, converting government subsidy payments into clean cash that could be moved across borders to support criminal enterprises. The ghost children were never intended to receive care. They were created as financial instruments, tools for extracting value from systems built on trust. Every fake identity unlocked a flow of funds. Every falsified attendance record justified another payment. The money entered the network as legitimate government transfers and exited as untraceable cash marked with cartel symbols. Communications immediately escalate to senior leadership at FBI and ICE headquarters. The scope of the operation expands beyond Minnesota. Coordinated actions are authorized at connected facilities in multiple states. Search warrants are expedited through federal judges who understand the time-sensitive nature of the situation. Within hours, teams are moving simultaneously against more than 30 locations, racing to secure evidence before word spreads and records disappear. The coordination is precise because it must be. A single warning reaching the wrong person could trigger destruction of evidence across the entire network. As the Minneapolis operation continues, a separate team acts on intelligence developed during the investigation, intelligence pointing toward an industrial property on the outskirts of the city. The location is officially listed as vacant, a former manufacturing facility that closed years ago and has remained empty since. But utility records tell a different story. Electricity consumption at the address has spiked dramatically over the past 18 months, reaching levels consistent with active industrial operations. Water usage follows the same pattern. Someone is operating something inside that building, and they have gone to considerable effort to conceal that activity from public view. Surveillance assets are redirected toward the industrial site. Aerial observation confirms what the utility data suggested. Vehicles move in and out of the property on regular schedules. Heat signatures indicate activity within the building that should be cold and empty. The decision is made to include this location in the coordinated enforcement action. When tactical teams breach the perimeter, what they find exceeds worst-case projections. The building has been converted into a production facility. Equipment lines fill the interior, configured for manufacturing at industrial scale. Chemical supplies are stacked in storage areas. Ventilation systems have been installed to manage fumes. And in secured sections of the building, people are found who clearly did not come here voluntarily. Individuals in poor physical condition, showing signs of prolonged confinement and inadequate nutrition, are recovered and transferred to medical facilities for evaluation and treatment. The full scope of what investigators have uncovered will take months to document completely. But the outline is already clear. The daycare fraud was not an endpoint. It was a financing mechanism for a much larger criminal operation. Public money intended to help working families afford childcare was being systematically diverted to support drug manufacturing, money laundering, and human trafficking. The ghost children created on paper were generating real revenue that funded real harm. The system designed to protect vulnerable families had been turned into a tool for criminal organizations to exploit. By the time the sun rises over Minneapolis, 92 individuals are in federal custody. Assets totaling hundreds of millions of dollars have been frozen. Evidence has been secured from more than 30 locations across 4 states. The daycare network that operated quietly for years, passing inspections and filing paperwork with bureaucratic precision, has been dismantled. But the questions that remain are as troubling as the crimes that were uncovered. How did a fraud of this scale operate for so long without detection? How many other networks are currently exploiting the same vulnerabilities in public assistance programs? And what systemic changes are needed to prevent this from happening again? The investigation revealed a fundamental weakness in systems built on trust and designed for efficiency rather than verification. The childcare subsidy programs exploited by this network process millions of transactions annually. Comprehensive verification of every claim would require resources that no state budget currently provides. The fraudsters understood this limitation and engineered their operation to pass the compliance checks that actually occur while avoiding the scrutiny that would expose their fabrications. They built a system designed to look legitimate from every angle that regulators typically examine. Only when investigators approached the data with suspicion, looking for patterns that should not exist rather than violations that obviously do, did the truth become visible. From a federal perspective, this case represents both a success and a warning. The investigation worked. The coordination between agencies produced results. The enforcement actions disrupted a criminal network that had been operating with impunity. But the network operated for years before it was detected. The damage it caused during that time cannot be undone. The public funds it diverted cannot be recovered. The people it harmed cannot be made whole simply by arresting those responsible. The systems that allowed this to happen remain fundamentally unchanged, vulnerable to the next organization sophisticated enough to exploit their weaknesses. This case does not end with the arrests announced in Minneapolis. It continues in courtrooms where evidence will be presented and judgments rendered. It continues in agency offices where analysts are already examining data from other states, looking for the same patterns that revealed this network. And it continues in legislative chambers where the question of how to prevent the next exploitation must eventually be answered. The daycare cartel case exposed something that extends far beyond one city or one criminal organization. It exposed the vulnerability of systems built on trust in an era when that trust can be systematically weaponized. If you want to understand how these investigations develop and where they lead next, subscribe to this channel. The story of fraud, trafficking, and criminal networks exploiting public systems does not end with one operation. Share your thoughts in the comments on where oversight failed and what should change, because cases like this one rarely stand alone, and the patterns uncovered here are almost certainly repeating somewhere else right now.